Here is my story. I met my wife, Catherine, in high school. We met a day before prom night. Neither of us had dates, so we decided to go together. She was the most beautiful girl I had ever met. That's where we hit it off. We dated for 5 years before getting married at a young age. My wife had a drinking problem, and she was once caught up in a drink and drive case, but I took care of her, and she recovered. We were always the so in love couple in our family and friends. 1 year into our marriage, we welcomed our boy, Adam. We were a complete family, everything I ever wished for. The only thing lacking in our life was that I didn't earn well. I worked at a government organization. Although it didn't affect me, my wife sometimes complained about not having good things. She wanted me to take bribes and be rich overnight, but it wasn't the life I wanted. My wife was from a middle-class family, but she liked expensive things. She was beautiful. She knew it and was proud of it. She had a huge social circle of rich friends. She often went to their parties wearing borrowed clothes or clothes she bought from expensive shops that she would return the next day. She was a wannabe. Nevertheless, I loved her with all my heart, and she loved me too until one day I took my wife to an office party. We got ready, and instead of going by the tube, my wife insisted we call an Uberlux. We obviously couldn't afford an Uberlux because of its high prices. My wife argued that the dress she bought would get ruined if she wore it on the tube, and she wouldn't be able to return it. She became upset, and this wasn't what I wanted. So I convinced her we could order an Uber ride instead of an Uberlux. When the car arrived, my wife seemed irritated. She told me I would be cheap forever. I tried to cheer her up on the way, but she remained frustrated. My wife suddenly held my hand and laughed as we entered the party. It was one of the things I didn't like about her. Her fake laugh. It irritated the hell out of me, but I still tolerated it because I loved my wife. She was stunned by how fancy the party was. There was expensive wine and dishes everywhere. My wife had a few drinks, and I stopped her before she could have any more and get out of control. She had a drinking problem since she was a teenager and was once charged with a drink and drive case. My wife pointed out how luxurious the dresses of other women were. She started complaining about her dress, and I told her she was the most beautiful woman at the party. My wife wasn't impressed by my compliment. My wife wanted to go home, but I told her to wait a little longer as I wanted her to meet my boss. She wasn't interested, but I insisted, and she decided to stay. I saw that my boss was free, so I took my wife to meet him. My boss James is usually dry, but he was surprisingly happy when he saw me and my wife. It was a little weird, but I thought it might be because it was a special occasion. He greeted me and my wife and started talking. He joked that he didn't know I had such a beautiful wife. I counted it as a compliment, and my wife was pleased. She loved being praised. We three were talking when one of my coworkers called me. I excused myself and went to meet him. After a while, when I came back, my wife told me she invited my boss to dinner tomorrow. I was glad about it. It was a good gesture. The next day, my wife got up early and started cleaning the house. It was nothing out of the ordinary. My wife came from the dressing room wearing a deep neck dress that I bought for her for our anniversary, which was next week. I asked her why she wore the anniversary dress today and that it was a little revealing. She sounded irritated, told me this was more important than our anniversary, and told me not to be so conservative. She said a rich man was coming to our house, which could bring many opportunities. At dinner time, my boss came with gifts. My wife served us dinner, and after that, my boss took one of the gifts out and opened it. It was a locket for my wife. My wife was overjoyed. She thanked him and instantly took off the locket I gave her on her birthday and wore that locket. I felt sad that my wife preferred an expensive locket over the locket I gave her. My boss brought a watch for me too, and thus it wasn't suspicious that he got an expensive gift for her. After my boss went home, my wife was all praises about him. I agreed that he was very generous. My wife was always around our son during the daytime and only went out when I was home to care for him. On our anniversary day, I came home early to surprise my wife. When I entered my house, I saw that nobody was home. I thought my wife and son had gone to the park or something. I sat down to drink a glass of water when the bell rang. I thought it was my wife and son, but when I opened the door, it was my neighbor with my son. She said that she had to go somewhere, so she had to bring him back. I didn't know why he was at my neighbor's house in the first place and where my wife was. After thanking the neighbor for having him, I closed the door and asked my son what was happening. He told me that my wife was going out for a few days and leaving him with the neighbor. It was a little suspicious. When my wife came home, I asked her about this, and she replied that she was planning a surprise for our anniversary. I was revealed and asked her what the surprise was. She seemed a little irritated and told me it was dinner. We both got ready and went for dinner. I was shocked to see that it was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I told my wife we couldn't afford this, but she hissed at me not to create a scene here. I silently went in with her. My wife went in and asked the receptionist for a table of two under the name Catherine. The receptionist reconfirmed that it was Catherine and James. My wife started acting a little weird. She was irritated and said it was under Catherine and John. The receptionist checked and told us there was no reservation for Catherine and John. My wife went out hissing about how bad the customer service was without saying another word. I told my wife it was okay, and we ate dinner at a local restaurant. My wife didn't say a word during it. A few days passed, and my boss started visiting my cabin often. He seemed to be happy with my work. One day he called me into his cabin and told me he wanted to invite me to dinner at his house on Sunday. I was surprised because my boss had never invited anyone to his house. I accepted his invitation. When I told my wife about the invitation, she became really happy. She seemed as if Cinderella was invited to the ball only if I could understand. It was finally Sunday, and my wife and I got ready. My wife insisted that we don't take our son because he might break anything. I wanted to take him and go as a family, but my wife argued. So I gave up and asked a neighbor to take care of our son because I couldn't afford a nanny. Upon arriving at his house, my wife got out of the car and started walking. When I tried to hold her hand, she brushed me off. I thought that she was upset about the anniversary dinner. My boss warmly welcomed us. My wife and my boss talked through the dinner. I was a little quiet because I'm an introvert, but this behavior wasn't unusual because my wife is an extrovert. During the dinner, I got a call from my mother. I couldn't hear her, so I went to talk to my mother. It took me a while, and when I returned, I saw my boss's hand on my wife's face. I stood there shocked. Then my boss looked at me and said my wife had something in her eye. He said it so casually that I had no reason to doubt it. After the dinner, my boss offered my wife a job at our office. He said that she was the right person to be his assistant. My wife agreed to it. It was a little weird because my wife had never wanted to work. My wife started working at the office, and we put our son in a daycare. I was happy to see my wife at work, but she usually ignored me. I thought it was because of work, as she has never worked. A few weeks passed, and my boss promoted me. I was happy with my promotion, but it meant that I had to be in another office. For the first few days, I used to come to pick up my wife, but then she insisted she would go home by herself. One day I decided to take my wife out for lunch during lunch break. I went to her office, but she wasn't there. When I asked the senior assistant where my wife was, she told me that my wife had gone out with my boss. I called her, but she didn't respond. I asked the senior assistant if they attended a meeting, but she said there was no meeting. Out of nowhere, I remembered that we both usually keep our location on so the other one knows. It was my wife's idea. I checked her location, and it showed that she was at my boss's house. I got a little suspicious. I went there, but the security didn't let me in. I told them to call my wife, and after several minutes, she came out and looked at me as if she had seen a ghost. I asked her what she was doing there. She told me that some paperwork needed to be done. I then noticed that a few buttons on her shirt were unbuttoned, and at that moment I knew that my wife was cheating on me. I told her we needed to go home, and she followed me. On our way home, I kept thinking about everything that had happened, and it all made sense now. She told me she had to go to a meeting with our boss out of the city today. I wanted to lash at her, but I had other plans. I wanted revenge. I kept calm and said it was okay and that I would take care of our son. When we went home, my wife went straight to the washroom. I wanted to confront and shame her, but before I could do that, I wanted revenge. I took her phone and typed in the PIN. To my surprise, my wife hadn't changed the PIN. I quickly looked at her messages and saw that she was texting my boss. I took screenshots of their texts and then quickly sent them to me. I then deleted my chat from her phone. Out of curiosity, I scrolled and discovered they had intimate photos together. I wonder how long all of this has been happening. Rage overpowered me. I also sent myself those photos and threw my wife's phone on the wall. She came out of the washroom and I lashed out at her. I confronted her and she started pleading, but I pushed her away. I told her she'll now know what it feels like to be broke. I stormed out, drove straight to the office, and showed HR the evidence of their affair. The company had strict rules, so they instantly took action. I was given a bonus for getting them caught. The company fired them, and I filed for divorce. In court, my wife tried to get custody of our son, but I had evidence that she had a drinking problem, and thus the court decided in my favor, and I got my son's custody. However, my wife was allowed to meet him on weekends under my supervision. My son said he was glad to be with me because his mother avoided him and never listened. I was furious at her. She was indulged in lust that she ignored her child, my son. But things got better and me and my son lived together happily. Few months passed and I dedicated all my attention to work. I got a promotion and was now at my boss's position. I had everything he had and what my wife wanted. Somehow my wife came to know about this. When she came to meet our son on weekends, she tried to seduce and win me over, but I was done with her games. My wife lost all her friends and now lives in a shabby apartment and couldn't get a decent job because of her previous records. Opie, first of all, I want to say that you didn't deserve what happened to you. Even if you are not rich, I think you have a heart of gold. You tried to please your wife, but she was never happy. She seems to be an ungrateful woman who will never be satisfied. You should have known that she was cheating on you when she made that reservation, but as it said, love is blind. Your revenge was epic. She deserved to be thrown back into her darkness. Thank you for sharing this great story with us. I wish you all the best going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. My 38 male and my wife 38 female have been married for 10 years. We've raised 2 wonderful children together, and we had a happy life up until she threw it all away. We met in our late 20s through a mutual friend who thought we would hit it off. He set us up on a blind date, and we instantly connected. I took her back to my apartment that night, and she never left. We were both young professionals focused on our careers and making names for ourselves. I admired her tenacity and ambition, and I knew early on that I wanted to be with her forever. Fast forward 10 years, my wife had been anticipating a huge promotion at work, so she was constantly at the office trying to put in the extra effort for it. The promotion would come with a large bonus that we planned on using to remodel our house and add a room for her mom to come live with us. I didn't think anything of her staying at the office later than normal. In hindsight, I can only wonder what happened all those nights that she didn't leave until 8 p.m. One night, she came home and told me about a conference that she was asked to attend in Baltimore. It wasn't an unusual occurrence for her to have to travel for work, so we made the proper arrangements for me to watch over the kids by myself while she was out of town. I kissed her goodbye and told her that I would miss her when she left, and she said the same thing. The first night that she was gone, she called me over FaceTime from her hotel room. She told me about how exhausted she was and gave me some details about the conference. She looked really stressed out, which I just assumed was because it was so last minute and she might have been unprepared. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was because she did something with her boss that first night and felt guilty. The next day, she texted me in the morning telling me she would be busy all day and wouldn't have time to check in, but she wanted me to tell the kids that she said good morning and that she loved them. I hadn't heard from her all day, but around 10 p.m. in the evening, I got a text message from a mutual friend. This mutual friend was the one who actually set us up 10 years ago. He was a close friend of mine from college, and he worked with my wife and knew her fairly well as an acquaintance. It had been a few weeks since we last talked, so I picked up my phone to see what was new with him. As soon as I opened our conversation, I felt my heart sink to my stomach. He attached an image of my wife sitting at a bar very close to her boss with her hands on his chest and looking up at him with a smile. The message just said, "I'm not sure what's going on, but I thought you should see this." I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. I tried to rationalize why she would be in such an intimate position with him, but I couldn't think of any good reasons. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I needed more information. Right away, I found her laptop and logged in. Her emails were relatively clean. I didn't see any signs of infidelity within them, but they were mostly work-related. I closed her laptop and resolved not to worry about it until I could talk to her. I really didn't want to cause some huge blow-on argument by accusing her of something she didn't do, and I trusted her enough to come clean if she did do anything. She got home Sunday night exhausted and complaining about having a horrible headache from the busy, loud crowd at the conference. I climbed into bed to go to sleep shortly after she arrived. She left to take a quick shower, leaving her phone behind. I definitely tried to ignore my curiosity, but I couldn't. I quickly scanned through her phone and looked for any signs of her cheating. Specifically, I searched through her messages with her boss. I didn't see anything right away, and I felt relieved. However, before I could put the phone down, I got a push notification from a fantasy football app. For reference, my wife does not care about sports. Her having a fantasy football app was pretty strange, so I had to click on the notification. As it turned out, the app was not about fantasy football. Instead, it was a discreet messaging app with a false notification system. I found all the evidence I was looking for in that app. Her boss had texted her and told her that he enjoyed the time they spent together and couldn't wait to see her again on Tuesday. I quickly searched their other messages and figured out that the conference was the first time they slept together. Apparently, they had been talking and exchanging pictures long before then. I quickly screenshotted some of the pictures they'd exchanged and sent them to myself, deleting them from her phone so she didn't even know they were sent. She got out of the shower and I rolled right over and pretended to fall asleep. I didn't want to talk to her about what I saw. In fact, I wanted to be as far away from her as possible. There was no chance I wanted to be with her again after finding that out. I loved her, but she completely shattered my trust in her. Divorce was the only option for me. I also knew that I wanted to get my revenge on her. Historically, I've been terrible at giving gifts for Valentine's Day and our anniversary. Things like that. My wife would always tell me that I could do more to show how much I cared about her. Well, I figured I might as well take her advice. Valentine's Day was right around the corner, so I planned to humiliate her in front of her coworkers and expose her boss for what he did. I explained the situation to the company and they helped me figure out some details. I then sent the evidence of what the boss did to HR and he instantly got fired. Later on, I showed up to her work carrying a bouquet of yellow roses, which apparently signifies betrayal. Several of my wife's coworkers gathered around while I read the message, assuming it was a declaration of my love. Instead, I served her with divorce papers and read a message telling her I knew about the affair with her boss and that it was over. The look on her face as the envelope was handed to her was priceless. We ended up filing for divorce. I kept the house and she moved in with her mother. Now we have joint custody of our children. Oh, V, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. It sounds like you had a picture-perfect life before she betrayed you and threw it all away. Considering she thought ahead to use a discreet messaging app, one wonder if you would have ever found out if it hadn't been for your friend cluing you in. It does seem like she might have felt guilty at first, but even after she returned from the trip, she still didn't say anything. She was likely going to continue her affair for as long as she could. I'm glad you were able to divorce her and move on with your life. I hope you recover from the breach of trust and are able to move on. Now, let's move on to our next story. A little backstory. My wife, 27 female, and I have been married for 5 years and things had been going well. We had some issues at the beginning of the pandemic due to the forced proximity, but we worked through them and came out stronger on the other side. My wife's biological father died when we were on our honeymoon. We ended up having to leave early and come back to the States to help plan for the funeral and comfort her mother. After a few years, her mom decided to start dating again, and that's when she met her new husband. It took a bit of adjusting for my wife because she felt somewhat betrayed that her mother had moved on. I helped her see that her mother was still young and she couldn't go through the rest of her life alone. At first, she didn't even care to get to know the man. He was a few years younger than her mother, but not so much as to cause concern. I guess in my wife's head, she automatically assumed the worst and thought he was with her mom for her money. I was close with her mom as well, so I took it upon myself to try and unite the family and convince my wife to give her new stepdad a proper chance. After about a year, it seemed like she was really warming up to him. As it turned out, they had a lot in common, and they were able to find some common ground to bond over. Last summer, we invited a bunch of relatives to stay at our house for the weekend. We had just installed an in-ground pool and hot tub, so we threw a huge barbecue to put them to good use. I noticed about halfway through the evening that my wife was MIA. She was supposed to be helping me with a lot of the cooking and hosting the party. I looked everywhere for her, but I couldn't find her. About an hour after I realized she was missing, I saw her walking up to the pool with her stepfather close behind. I walked up to them and asked where they were. They both just shrugged their shoulders, and my wife said they had gone to the small pond behind the house to see if there were any fish. I didn't think anything of it then, but now I know that is where this all started. Weeks and months passed, and my wife had been growing distant. I knew things were stressful for her at work, so part of me thought that was where it stemmed from. She was also spending more time with her stepfather, which I never thought was anything to be concerned about. He had a boat that he would take her fishing on, since that was something she used to do with her dad. The more I think about this story, the more I know Freud is rolling around in his grave screaming that he was right. Anyway, I pulled my wife aside one weekend when she had planned on fishing with him and told her that I felt like she was pulling away from me. I suggested we go out, just the two of us, and spend the weekend somewhere nice. She seemed reluctant to agree, but in the end she called her stepfather and canceled. I booked us an errand at this cozy mountain lodge so we could spend some quality time along sightseeing. When I say she was glued to her phone the entire trip, believe me, she hardly took her eyes off of it. I didn't want to say anything about it because I could sense that we would just argue about it if I did, so I kept my mouth shut. However, I was curious about what was so important. Later that afternoon, she decided to take a nap in front of the fireplace. I took the opportunity to peek at what she was up to. Right away, I was shocked by what I found. The text message exchanges between her and her stepfather were filthy. They had been sending each other pictures and scheduling dates to go out. They had been referencing things they had done on the occasions they'd been together. I realized that all of the boat trips were just an excuse for them to sleep together. Not only was I furious about what she had done to me to throw away our marriage, but I was also angry about what she had done to her mother. Her actions were completely unforgivable, and I could see no way of moving forward with her. I didn't have time to send myself any screenshots or record any of the evidence. She was a light sleeper, and I didn't want her to wake up and see me snooping at her phone. I needed to catch them in the act. That would be the only way I could divorce her and retain my assets. She woke up shortly after and immediately looked through her phone, no doubt texting her stepfather discussing things. I faked a stomach bug so we could go back to the house and I could distance myself from her. Because we cut the trip short, she used that as an excuse to meet up with her stepfather to go fishing. I just nodded my head and told her to go for it because I didn't want to look at her. I didn't realize what opportunity was in front of me when she left, but shortly after I realized it was the perfect time to catch her. I debated involving her mother-in-law in all of it, but in the end I figured that she needed to know. I called her up to see what she was doing, and when I told her I wanted to grab lunch, she was more than happy. On the way there, I told her I had to drop something off for my wife at the boat. We both walked down the docks to where the boat was and boarded it. It was still at the marina, so I worried that maybe they weren't actually on the boat together. When we walked to the cabin below, we found them. We caught them in the middle of the act together. I pretended to be shocked and comforted my mother-in-law while she digested what was happening. My wife tried to justify it by saying she was in love with him unlike she had ever been with anyone else, but it only made things worse. I drove my mother-in-law home, leaving them both behind on the boat. I comforted her and ensured she was okay before I made any attempts to figure out what I planned to do. Eventually, she calmed down enough to call my wife and confront her. She told her over the phone that she never wanted to see her again and couldn't forgive her for what she'd done. I stayed with my mother-in-law for a couple of days, so she wouldn't feel so alone. After we took all of her future ex-husband's things out of the house and changed the locks, I went home to find that my wife had left. I emailed her telling her I was filing for divorce, but she never replied. I still have no clue where she or her stepfather are, but I'm filing for a default divorce. Ope. I can't believe you had to go through something like this, and I am truly sorry for you and your mother-in-law. First of all, good on you for standing by her when she was going through something so difficult. It's unbelievable that her own daughter would stoop so low. It's clear that your soon-to-be ex-wife was immature and selfish. Not only did she throw away your marriage, but she also ruined her own mother's. Running away and avoiding the consequences of her actions is an immature move that is only drawing out the pain for you while you wait for the divorce. I hope you and your mother-in-law can find peace and move on with your life without them. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. My wife and I were married for 10 years. Our anniversary party was coming up, and I couldn't believe I was lucky enough to find someone to be with for so long. We knew everything about each other and were best friends. Our zodiac signs were soulmates, so maybe that explains it. I did see that her sign can be known for cheating, but I ignored that, and for 10 years it was fine. We had a daughter 3 years into our marriage. My wife worked the same career all those years, and she was about to receive her biggest raise yet, just before our planned summer family vacation. It really seemed like I found true love and would always have her. The night she got home from getting her raise, she was flustered and blown away at the good news. She acted like it hadn't sunk in yet. I thought I saw an expression on her face that looked blown away and worried about something. I asked if she was having trouble believing her own success, and she forced a laugh and said yeah. She wasn't convincing me. I knew something else was going on, but when I tried asking, she said she was fine and only pleasantly surprised. I didn't know what else to say, but her cheating on me did not cross my mind. Then she said something weird. Before she went into our bedroom, she said her boss is incredible and she was lucky he likes her so much. This made me do a double take. It sounded weird, and I think she realized she slipped by saying it that way. The next day was the same day as our anniversary party. As we got ready, she got a phone call, and it was her boss. She dismissed herself to talk in the office, which she normally did, so she could write stuff down for later. Unbeknownst to my wife, I snuck right up against the door to listen to their conversation. At first, she just thanked him again for the raise, and then she got really quiet. She whispered that she was glad she could thank him properly, that he was really amazing, and that she wanted to feel him again. Then she asked him if there were any security cameras that could see into his office. She was quiet for a beat, then said that was good, because no one could find out what they were doing, or they'd be fired. I was putting together a pretty clear picture in my head. I wanted to barge into the room and tell her I heard everything, but I decided to make an announcement at our anniversary party. I had to do something that would force me to follow through with confronting her and divorcing her. I was sure she just confirmed out loud that she slept with her boss in his office. I stood paralyzed outside the door until she came out. She was really worried I was standing so close. She was trying to figure out if I was okay, but I just plastered on this fake smile. She asked if I was ready, and we left. I was like a zombie, and she was antsy. She only smokes cigarettes when she's really stressed out, and on the way there she lit one. She tried asking me again if I was okay, and I know she really wanted to ask if I heard her conversation. We arrived at the venue, and I turned to her to say, "Let's go celebrate our 10-year marriage, wife." I sounded like a robot in the absence of anger, and she knew I heard them, but she couldn't bring herself to talk to me about it. We went inside, and she sat there sweating until I got up to give a speech. I let her sit there for a while, taking my time to calmly greet our friends and family and pretend everything was fine. Our 7-year-old was there too. She was at my parents' for the week to give my wife and I time to ourselves as an anniversary present. Seeing all of our loved ones and daughter made my wife start itching herself a lot. She looked like she was going through withdrawals. Her face was red, and people actually started circling her, saying she didn't look good. She swore she was fine, but people could see her skin was slick with sweat. I took this as an opportunity. I told everyone in a loud and clear voice that my wife was having an affair with her boss. Everyone gasped, and my wife fainted. Since our family and friends aren't heartless, they started fanning her and got a cold cloth for her forehead. The old-fashioned thing to do, I guess. When she came to, she was so ashamed she couldn't speak. She finally said she wanted to go home, and I asked her what home. She started bawling and ran to the bathroom. I thanked everyone for coming and picked up my daughter and took her home. We were in bed while my wife called a few times. 2 other people called, but I didn't hear any of it because I was asleep. I think I felt so content that I found out the truth before long and followed through with kicking her out. I found out later that one of my wife's cousins let her stay at her house. That wasn't all that was going to change, though. I emailed their company's HR about what happened. They got back to me a week later, thanking me for the information and informing me proper action was taken. My wife called me first. She said I was a low slime bag for ruining her and her boss's careers that they worked towards their whole life. I told her she was a low slime bag for ruining our marriage after I worked hard for her and our daughter for 10 years of my life. How could she ever look up to her mother again? I didn't hear from her until visitation with our daughter started after our divorce. I've already found a woman with a daughter of her own that's done things for me my ex never would have considered, but it's bittersweet because I realized I wasted a lot of time trusting her. Opie, I am sorry your wife made the dishonorable decision to sleep with her boss as a thank you for a raise and that she had the nerve to talk to him on the phone about it behind your back. She obviously didn't realize the magnitude of her mistake and that they wouldn't get away with this consequence-free. I am glad to hear what steps you took to get her out of your life and own up to her mistake. She deserved every minute she felt uncomfortable or sick because of her actions. She didn't consider you were her daughter, who looked to her for an example of how a woman and wife behaves. It's a shame, and I am glad you have a second chance at living life with a better, more trustworthy woman. I wish you all the best with your situation. Now, let's get into our second story for today. My wife, 35, of 2 years, had been working as a college professor for a few years when this story took place. She had worked hard for several years to get this job, and she had every right to be proud of herself. Her parents certainly were. She had a huge graduation and new job party with the whole family in town. We even waited to get married per her request so that she could ensure her dream job. This was what she was all about, and I couldn't imagine her doing anything that would jeopardize her job or our future together. But I wouldn't be here today if she didn't. She became good friends with some of her students. They were in their late 20s, so they were similar enough in age, but I did think it was a little weird that she was friends with them while also being their professor. It didn't seem like a very professional choice, but I hesitated to tell her my opinion. She actually went to some of the parties they had. As far as what she told me, it was more like a group get-together, much more chill than a party. She said they even discussed some of the lesson topics with her because that's just how passionate and focused her students were. I just let it keep happening. I really wish I would try to convince her to stop mixing her dream job with pleasure, but she was so happy. She really was on top of the world and felt like she was making a difference in their lives. She always came home at a reasonable time because she didn't want to leave me alone all night, and she never went out more than 2 times a month. I knew something was wrong when she stayed out until 2 a.m. I was awake and waiting for her, and we had a fight. She said she was just helping her students, but this was unacceptable to me. I demanded to know what was really going on, but she wouldn't say anything different. I asked her not to socialize with students for a while, and she freaked out. She called me controlling and started crying. She claimed to be a responsible woman that deserved to live her life freely, especially when she found someone that made her so happy. My eyes went wide. She quickly corrected herself to say something and said she was mixing up words because I was confronting her and she was tired. I was so concerned by her mistaken wording, but I didn't have it in me to argue any more that night. I couldn't ask her to take off work either. I wasn't sure how or when I was going to bring this up again. I knew I should, but I thought I'd just wait to see what else she was going to do. For a while, everything calmed down. She didn't stay out and only went to work and came home. It was great, but she still had to grade papers at home, and for that I left her alone to study. I then walked in on her texting someone, and it made her jump out of her skin. That was weird, but I didn't draw attention to it. I thought about checking her phone later, but she had a code on it. I decided I was going to set up an opportunity for her to bring students to the house, but I'd secretly be hiding nearby. I needed to know who these people were and if something else was going on. She fell for it super quickly. As soon as I said I was going to spend an evening with my mom in the nursing home, she was thrilled. She said I was so sweet for going and offered to give me a ride and then pick me up later. To throw her off, I agreed and walked back to the house. It took 20 minutes. I wasn't sure what I was going to find, but I still had trouble picturing my wife doing anything less than honorable. A few times I told myself I was crazy and started walking back to my mom, but then I turned back around again. When I got there, I could see a different car outside her house. She expected to have all the time she needed to do whatever she wanted and then come pick me up. Seeing the mystery car fueled me, and I ran to the front door. I unlocked it with shaking hands and saw the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. My wife was having sex with her student. Before either of them put their pants on, I took a picture. It's a high-tech world now. I took my phone out when I saw the mystery car so I'd be prepared to take a picture of whatever my wife was up to. If it was all good, I would have been the crazy one, but now she was. It all started to hit me after she got her pants on and her student ran outside. She started yelling God knows what while my head started pounding. I could only hear my heartbeat as I thought about how our marriage was over and the future I expected to have with her was a false hope. Her career was over. She'd never be allowed to teach at this school again. The next school would want to know why she was fired from this school. I snapped out of it and demanded to know why she risked everything she worked so hard to build for one of the first students she ever had. She stared at me blankly and then said he asked her to hang out with him and she didn't expect anything bad to happen. I started yelling when I said something bad has definitely happened. She brought him to our house and opened her legs. She started flipping me off and screaming at me saying it wasn't her fault and I stopped them from finishing so it shouldn't even count. My jaw dropped. I told her she was so shockingly wrong in her logic that I couldn't even argue with her. I packed my bags and got hotel room. I didn't feel like arguing with her anymore that night about who was going to be the one to leave. It felt like I was talking to a spoiled brat that expected to get away with this because of everything she accomplished prior to it. I was not going to stick around and I wasn't going to let her keep her job either. I filed for divorce and sent the picture to the president of the college just as I suspected she was fired. She hated me and could not look me in the eye at any of our future interactions. I never saw her eyes again. She went from a confident, flawless, overachieving woman to one of shame and disgrace. Her parents couldn't even believe it and actually asked me to send them the picture. I did reluctantly. They apologized to me. My wife didn't work for any colleges in the state. After waiting a few years, she moved out of state probably because she couldn't get a job no matter where she applied. I have started dating again, but I will not be quick to believe I know someone's personality or that they'll remain trustworthy at all times. Ope. I am so sorry your wife betrayed you by bringing one of her students into your house and sleeping with him. It's despicable, and I can only imagine how surprised you were. Given how hard she had to work to get this job and how happy she was, you would have thought she'd be able to make the honorable choice not to risk her marriage or job. I congratulate you for taking the steps you needed to knowing when you had to leave filing for divorce and showing the college president evidence of what she'd done. She had so much support and a great future ahead of her, and she flushed it down the toilet because she couldn't resist one of the first men she encountered as a professor. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Hi all, I'm new here and to Reddit in general. I found this sub after I started dating my current wife, and it's been eye-opening to read what everyone's gone through. I decided to share my story of my ex-wife, Elle, as a kind of airing out of the whole thing, to help myself organize my thoughts on everything. I'm also hoping to help out anyone on here who's currently in a relationship with a wayward spouse and isn't sure what to do. Maybe this will help push you to get out of a toxic spot and take what you deserve from life. I grew up on a 26-acre horse farm out in rural Ohio. Growing up, I was a loner and preferred reading books to talking to people. My parents had gotten divorced when I was young. I lived with my mom and saw Dad every other weekend. This did have an effect on me growing up, mainly because I had a hard time knowing what a healthy relationship looked like and didn't really have time with my dad to have a healthy male role model. My mom had a series of boyfriends, some of which were physically abusive to my brother and me. I remember getting backhanded across a room at 10 by one of them, or belted anytime anything at all was out of order. Another one used glue traps for the mice in the garage and made us watch when he cut them off the traps, which he'd do by cutting all their legs off before throwing the still living legless mouse in the trash can. A real gem, that one. I learned very quickly to just keep my mouth shut and act generally pleasant, because anything else might get me punished, usually hit. This also made me develop an unhealthy attitude of just grin and bear it, don't have issues, and if people were bad to me, I'd just take it. Whenever I could, I would recess into myself and my books. I was a voracious reader and had over 1,000 books on 5 double-stacked bookshelves in my bedroom. I'd hide in there in the winter once all the chores were done. Anytime the weather was good enough, I'd be outside reading in the forest or out in the hayfield, and I spent a lot of time over in the old cemetery across our field. It was beautiful, but looking back, probably not the most healthy lifestyle. Sorry for the backstory dump, but through some therapy, I've come to realize that my upbringing put me in a vulnerable spot for staying with an abusive partner. My hang-ups and coping mechanisms just led me to tolerate a lot of intolerable behavior from people. Elle and I met when we were in our mid-teens at a church lock-in that neither one of us wanted to be out of all things and hinted off right off the bat. She was one of those mid-2000s quirky girls, writing weird poetry, yelling spork, all the standard stuff at the time, and she was decently attractive with curly hair. She came up and challenged me to an air hockey game, and you know how the rest of that story goes. We dated pretty much exclusively for the next 7 years. We finished high school together, went to the same college, and even got the same scholarship to attend the same local state college. We had our ups and downs, but I put that down as just how relationships must be. She was erratic at the best of times and tried isolating me from the few friends I had because they were jealous of her taking all my time. She'd cry over the smallest stuff, hit me when she was mad over things I had nothing to do with, and just generally pester me to shower her with love. She needed constant validation from everyone around her and wasn't too shy about trying to get it. I put up with all this because she was my first real girlfriend, and she was great at just minimizing her bad behavior into something I was just too dumb to get. I just think she was being irrational, but would put up with it to get back to our normal lives. College was where the more obvious red flags started coming. Within a few months of her coming to college, she was constantly hanging around with other dudes in our dorm. Honors dorm. There were all-male and all-female suites that shared a building. I would ask if we were still good and get positive answers, but then find her sitting on some guy's lap in his room later that same night. Multiple times I caught her making out with randoms and just generally behaving inappropriately with guys. After I told her everything I'd seen and threatened to break up with her if she didn't tell me the truth, it came out that she'd given one other guy oral, which she described in excruciating detail. She said she was obsessed with him because, no lie, he looks like the guy from Napoleon Dynamite and is just really hot. Yes, I should have ended everything we had right there for that comment alone, but we'd been together for nearly 5 years at that point, so I thought we could fix things and reconcile. I confronted the guy, she cut off contact, and things got better for a bit. I ended up getting a decent job with a local construction company during my junior year of college and saved up enough in 6 months to make a down payment on a house. This was in 2008 in an older steel town, so housing values were pretty much at rock bottom. I talked it over with Elle, and we decided to buy a house fairly close to our school and just start our life together while we finished up college. We also got engaged shortly after moving in. I thought that by removing her from the co-ed dorm I'd fix her cheating issues, and it really did seem to work for a bit. All in all, it seemed like life was looking up. There were some good years for a while. She got a job selling books, then went on for a graduate degree. Actually, she tried for 4 different graduate degrees, but kept quitting because they weren't what she wanted to do. I paid for the ones she couldn't get a scholarship or student loans for, and just generally supported her and her decisions. We got a dog and some cats. I kept working at that same construction job but it paid the bills. We got married in 2010 when we were 23. Kids, don't get married young. You don't know what a good relationship is yet. I want to get across here that it was exactly where I thought a good life was. I'd get up early, give her a kiss, and head to work, where I'd occasionally get reprimanded for not reading my boss's mind. I'd do drafting and job takeoffs, or go to a job site and wear myself out doing whatever work they needed since it was a small business and everyone wore a lot of hats. Then I'd come home, let the dog out, and listen to Elle talk about her day. If I complained about my day, I wasn't being manly enough and was just adding to her stress, so I'd just start making dinner or mowing the lawn, whatever. Rinse and repeat. I thought this was completely normal and maybe even better than average. The wheels really started to come off, though I didn't know it for a while, when Elle got a new job with a local energy company doing the mapping. She was finally making more than minimum wage and was only there for a few months before her boss's boss took notice of her. I don't think it was 4 months before suddenly she got a job as a process assistant in a large nearby city, which was a 2-hour drive for her. I'm not sure of the details, but within those same few months, she started an emotional and eventual physical affair with her new boss. I still don't know what to think of this since the guy was 30 years older than her, was recently separated from his wife, and was literally living in his mom's basement. I noticed she was withdrawing more than usual from the relationship, but figured it was the stress from a big corporate job and the drive. I tried putting in more effort and surprising her with gifts and stuff, but nothing really landed. Again, I just figured she'd get used to the work and things would go back to normal. In January 2013, we moved to Cleveland to be closer to her work. I found a new and much better job. We got a really nice place for less than the market price, and everything was shiny again. Sure, she had to work really late quite often, but that's corporate. She'd gotten a pay raise for her excellent work. I was making new work friends and was finally coming out of her shell a bit. Elle also started going out with work friends a lot and quickly started staying out very late and coming home drunk as a skunk, which led to more than a few fights between us. Things deteriorated, and again we just settled into a new equilibrium where we talked less to each other, and when we did talk it would be the most milquetoast of topics. In December 2014, we went down to see her parents in Texas and had a great trip. It really seemed to rekindle some of those feelings we'd been missing, and it really made me realize that things were more messed up in our relationship than I thought. When we got back, I had a real moment with Elle where I told her that I really had a great time and want to keep being as invested in each other as we were on the trip. I felt like I had a kind of epiphany where I knew we could change our relationship for the better, and I was inviting her to help me with it. She screamed, straight up looked at me with panicked eyes, stuttered, screamed, and ran away down to the basement. I followed trying to figure out just what I had said that would have led to that reaction, which led to her accusing me of cornering her in the basement. I backed off and she, through tears, told me that she didn't deserve love. I tried to ask her what this was about, got nothing from her, and we finally just went into separate rooms to calm down. The next day I tried to bring it up and she told me in no uncertain terms that none of that happened, and if I brought it up again she would leave. Straight up denied that she freaked out, that we had even seen each other the day before. I, obviously, got really suspicious that something was up after that point, but I didn't really think it was cheating, more just that she was being insecure. She'd always been very insecure in general, just never to a level that made her freak out like that. After that episode, one decided that my teenage self was correct, that having a roommate who was occasionally funny and sometimes slept with me was about as good a relationship as I would ever get. I had a prejudice against divorce after seeing how my mom's life had turned out afterward, so I decided I'd just make this work however I could. The staying out, drinking, and random outbursts kept going at her end, and I decided to just never bring up my feelings unless she asked directly. Meanwhile, I decided to work on myself first, to be a better, more interesting partner. I started building up my home gym, working out, and got into backpacking and woodworking, things that I always kind of liked but never had time for. Elle had complained that I had no hobbies and wasn't interesting enough for her around this time, so I took her at her word that this would help more than actually talking about our issues. This is one of the few good things that came out of the relationship, as I'm still pretty physically fit and look much better than ever before in my life. Plus, my woodworking and turning have turned into a lot of useful life skills. D-Day was in April 2015. She came home from a night out with friends insanely drunk. I'm still not sure how she made it home. She threw up multiple times while I held her hair, then passed out on the floor by the toilet. She was so drunk she would breathe in these odd gasps, and I thought she was just going to stop breathing at one point. I thought about calling an ambulance, but just decided to wait it out a bit. She had her phone beside her on the floor, and it kept getting texts, which I ignored for a while. Finally thought it was probably someone checking to see if she got home okay, so I decided to open it with her thumbprint and respond. The texts were all from her boss, and the last one was something along the lines of, "We can't do this in the office anymore, or we will get caught." I immediately understood what was happening and felt like the stupidest dude ever that I didn't put it together at any point in the last 2 to 3 years. I still feel dumb about it. We were young, but that's no excuse to be so naive and checked out about your marriage. I had always just assumed we had grown distant, but I had never once thought of cheating on her and just assumed she felt the same way. I started going through all her texts with him and saw that this had been going on for a while, though it was unclear when it went from being an EA instead of a good working relationship, and then again on when the stuff started. I did find a message from earlier that same night between pictures down her shirt from the bar where they were at, where they were talking about the next time they'd meet up just a week or so away. I decided that if I told her anything at that point, she was going to flip it around into me snooping and misreading or misremembering what I read, since I have a terrible memory. Guessing now that was just her gaslighting me to cover up her own indiscretions. Instead of confronting her, I went out and bought a voice recorder and spent a few days placing it in her car before work to find a well-hidden spot and test how long it could record for. I also scoped out where they were planning on meeting up so I could find it the day of. The day before the meetup, she had told me she needed to go to a separate nearby town for work and that she'd be late coming home. I told her it was fine and to take her time coming home. Inside, I was nervous, but apparently held it together enough to keep her from being suspicious. The hours passed, then around 6 p.m. I headed out and drove to a spot near the bar they were meeting at, and wham, there they were. Both were in her car pawing each other and making out. I just drove away, went home, had some shots, and cried. She came home later that night, and I didn't say anything about it, just made us some dinner. She was all bubbly about how well her meeting had gone and thanked me for being understanding. After she went to bed, I went out and got the voice recorder and listened through it and heard her begging to go back to their office to do the deed, amongst other things. I couldn't even figure out how to react. She was never like this at home and sounded nearly deranged in how much she wanted to be with him. I listened through this all, then went in and woke her up and told her we needed to talk. I asked if she was cheating and she denied it. I asked her about the name of the bar she was at and she denied even knowing what it is. I told her I was there earlier today and saw some interesting things, and she immediately asked if I had followed her. How could I? And is there a tracker in my car? You have to tell me I'm going to have a panic attack. You can't just track me. Again, insane. I told her I had read her texts from a few weeks ago and went to the bar where she said she was meeting her boss. This turned into opening her phone to show me no such texts existed anymore, which I think she thought would negate the fact I went there and saw them. So crazy thinking about it. Finally, she says that yes, she had been seeing they'd been together a few times, and finally, if I made her stop seeing him, she wouldn't love me anymore. Somehow this worked on me. I had no self-confidence, didn't like divorce as an institution, and figured being with someone to split the bills was better than being alone, and for a few months that was it. She'd have meetups with him, I would try to talk her out of it. There were crazy moments. S had other girlfriends and Al knew about them and got jealous of them. One time she came home sobbing and I hugged her while she told me that she thought S was breaking up with her for someone else. I just went still inside. I don't think I felt anything other than a kind of ironic humor in it, like an eye-rolling feeling. Still don't know why I stuck around after that, and of course, they kept seeing each other. Around this point, she also started having one-night stands with random other guys. I found out about a few of them over the years and suspect a few more. Finally, I drove myself into having a panic disorder and decided enough was enough. I gave her the voice recorder and demanded that she break it off with S and record herself while she was telling him or I was out. She cried but finally relented. The next day, she did what I asked. When S found out, I knew he immediately panicked, and I got to watch those texts come in on Al's new Apple Watch that she didn't realize didn't delete texts that you removed from your phone. Things settled a bit, and we went to marriage counseling for a session. I agreed to not tell the counselor about her infidelity this session as the condition for Elle to even go. The counselor then spent the whole session telling me I was smothering Elle by wanting to go through her phone and know where she was, which I only started doing after the cheating. We never went back. That was from 2015 to 2016. After that, we stayed together, and about twice a year I'd find some new infidelity. Once she was drunk and did oral on a guy she worked with in the bathroom. Once on a work trip out of state, she started texting a guy and started the weirdest EA I've ever heard of. A decent chunk of his texts was about how his grandmother had to wipe his, but until he was in his mid-teens and he liked it. The whole time I just got used to pain shopping. It almost became a game for us where she'd find out how I found out, would swear to stop seeing / talking to / screwing so and so, while also disconnecting her Apple Watch or not using her car, etc. Looking back, I just kind of got used to it. I checked out of the relationship in any real sense. Funny enough, we'd have fights about me not being invested in the relationship during this time too. I finally had enough when I got a message out of the blue from one of her coworkers' wives, and she caught her husband and Elle texting and snapping. She sent screenshots of them to me and said that she wanted me to know. The screenshots really drove home to me that Elle wasn't just prone to strain or was making mistakes over and over. I know it's dumb, but when you're in a relationship, if you excuse one thing, it gets easier the next time, and I had gotten to the point of excusing everything. We'd have our ritual fight over it. She'd end the affair, and the cycle would begin again in a few months. In the screenshots from N, Elle was saying things like, I should have done you the first time I saw you, setting up meetings, etc. I confronted Elle with the texts, and her first reaction was annoyance that the guy didn't hide it from his wife better. It blew my mind, and when I was talking with N, it was obvious she was crushed. They had 2 kids, and her husband's actions were likely going to tear the family apart, and there was my loving wife mad that he was too dumb to hide it properly, and she knew he couldn't handle this sort of relationship. And sent me some texts later on after the affair was in the open of Elle telling the guy that there was basically a code of conduct for cheaters, and this guy didn't follow the rules. I snapped out of it. Like, I finally felt awake after 6 years of affairs and 10 years before that of just general abuse and incoherence. I moved into the finished half of the basement, slept on an air mattress by my gym, and started drawing up dissolution papers. I figured if the dissolution failed, I could always hire an attorney and get a divorce. I ghosted Elle as hard as I could, being in the same home 100% Grey Rock. Elle started love bombing me in her own weird way. One time I got home from work and she bought a lamp for the basement and put it by my air mattress. Probably the sweetest thing she'd ever done for me. To drive home everything, a few days later, she was working from home in the afternoon and didn't hear me go into the kitchen for a drink. I could hear she was on speakerphone on the couch, and it was S, still her boss, and the guy all of this started with. I heard him ask if she was alone, and she said yes. I thought, really? Really? Right now, as I'm prepping the dissolution in the same house, she's going to indulge this guy. I crept closer and listened in. He started talking about how he had never done it in a car in an automated car wash and thought that would be fun. I just walked and got behind her head on the couch and yelled, "Hi S. Nice hearing from you." Elle jumped and nearly fell off the couch. Just immediately hung up and I laughed and went to put on my shoes. Elle yelled out that was rude. I laughed again and got my coat. Elle asked where I was going and I set out. I must have said it in a way where she finally got it that we were done. We had been done and now I was just wrapping it up. She ran up and blocked the door. I told her to move and she got this weird little smile on her face. I still remember it. Like all this was still a game that if she blocked the door then I just have to stay and we would still be married. That her plan to keep me by physically blocking the door had no chance of failing and I was just stuck now. I grabbed her by her shoulders and picked her up and moved her. Just feet off the floor right over to the side of the door then gently back down on her feet. Told her if she tried to keep me there I would take her apart because I didn't have it in me anymore to deal with her and all the anger I've been pushing down my whole life was still all right there. I had never touched her violently and still never have, but that was the closest I got. I drove off to one of my favorite local bars and hung out with friends I've been making for the last few years. I texted Elle that I knew she had another work trip coming up that next week and that when she got back, she wouldn't be welcome back in the house. Lucky me, she never came back. Moved in with a guy she'd been seen down there, and they both lived in his brother's dining room since the guy was unemployed and living with his brother. I only saw her a few times after that. She signed the paperwork I sent her with next to no changes. I used the threat that her company would fire both her and her boss if I told them of the relationship they carried on, if she tried to be difficult, which got me the house, my car, and less than half of the over $20,000 in credit card debt I didn't know she had racked up. Also, none of my retirement accounts got touched, which is a blessing. She came back to Ohio to sign the paperwork in December 2019 and brought her new guy, which was about as awkward as you'd expect. The new guy seemed to think that I was at fault for the divorce for being abusive and he was there in case I got violent. Again, I had never hurt her and that includes when she'd get violent with me. I'd just pin her arms and wait for her to stop trying to hit me. I never told him that she cheated on me because I'm pretty sure he was one of the guys she did it with, so I'm thinking he already knew. The other time was when she came back for her stuff that was still in the house while I watched her pack up. A few months had passed. She told me she got a new apartment and that new guy had moved in without asking. She found out when he was helping her move and sat the urn with his dead dad in it on her table. She gave me a weird help me look and I just laughed. After that, I didn't see her again. Within a week of the divorce, I got cold approached by a girl at a concert and got her number then again at a local event. Within a month, I was actively dating 4 people, all of which were better than Elle in every way. My friends said that I had that fresh on the market vibe, lol. I was just happy for the first time in a very long time, and it made it easy to attract people. I calmed down a bit on the dating though. I did have a few girlfriends. Doubled down on my workout routine, went to Peru and hiked the Cordillera Blanca mountains and almost got stuck there when C-19 hit. Got into my ancestry after a 23andMe test and found a weird little utopian commune that was founded by a guy with my last name, though it's mostly historical buildings now. Elle tried to stay in contact over the last few years, sometimes for actually important things, mostly bull, just trying to keep me in her life somehow. I've ignored it though. I've got some funny insights like how the new guy immediately started fake proposing multiple times a week and it was freaking her out. She texted me once saying that taxes sucked as a single, so she was getting married for tax reasons. When she found out I had found someone and got me engaged, she sent a congratulations card to the house that she had hand painted herself, which immediately went in the trash. Or the fact that the new guy was recently diagnosed with MS. I don't see Elle sticking around and suddenly finding her caring side to take care of a dude 10 years her senior with a neurological issue. In August 2020, I encountered my current wife, C. She's amazing, had gotten out of a bad marriage with a guy who seems a mirror image of Elle. We hit it off when I was talking with a buddy of mine, and I said I'm just looking for someone normal. She heard me, and we both looked at each other for a second with a funny me too. Look, we got married after 2 years of dating this last September, and we've never even fought once in the last year. She takes care of me, I take care of her, we talk every day, and it's always beautiful. It's really tough to describe, but she's the one. I'm doing much better now. I look back on all that, on literally half of my life, and wonder why I stayed for so long and through so much, especially when it was so easy to find someone so perfect afterward. If any of you made it this far and are currently in a bad relationship and wondering what to do, I get it. I think most of us get it. You put up with stuff that you think you never would. You think that this person you've put so effort into can't be doing this on purpose. You'll excuse next to anything. You actively make yourself into a doormat. It's not worth it. Just get out, because whatever led to cheating once, it'll happen again and again after that. Cheaters will tell themselves whatever they need to in order to not feel bad about themselves and their actions. They will always justify it to themselves and to you, and you'll always wonder what they're doing when they're not with you. You deserve better. So leave, cut losses, and do whatever you need to. My hang up on divorce and low self-confidence kept me in way longer than I ever should have, and nothing that happened in the relationship in the years after I found out helped me in any way. The only person that can get you into a better headspace is yourself, and focusing on you and the people that actually care about you. It gets better once you leave. Opie, your redemption story is absolutely incredible. I think this is, by far, one of the best redemption stories I've read on this sub. I am more than proud of you that you were able to get your life back together. You are now living the life you deserve to live, and your ex's history. Let's all have a toast to celebrate Opie's victory. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on today's story.